Hello, welcome back. Over the last couple of years, I've read a decent amount, and I've been trying to varietize the authors that I'm reading. Although I have spent a lot of my time reading Brandon Sanderson, I've been getting myself caught up on the Cosmere since I feel like I joined so late. There was already a lot of Cosmere work out when I started getting into fantasy, but I've done really well, and I have, I believe, 2 books left. 3 books left. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, Rhythm of War, and The Sunlit Man. And then there's Wind and Truth coming out in December. I'm hoping to at least finish Yumi and Rhythm of War before Wind and Truth comes out. I don't think I have to read Sunlit Man before that point, so that might slide into next year. But then that's it. Then I'm done. I'm all caught up. No more books until he releases more. Which on one hand is like, oh, bummer, I'll be done with Brandon Sanderson. I love his stuff. But on the other hand, it's kind of very exciting because all that time that I've been dedicating to his stuff, I can now dedicate to a bunch of other authors that I haven't started yet. I'm pretty tapped into the book-related social media content, so I hear a lot of people talking about all these fantastic authors that I've just never read, and I feel like I'm missing out. So I sat down and I thought about who the authors are that I feel like I am most missing out on. This list is in no order other than the order that they came into my head, and I'm hoping that you can help me put them in order. I'm trying to rank them in order of read it now to take your time, read that whenever you get to it. For some of these authors, they have only one series that I'm interested in, and some of them have just an absurd amount of books, and I don't know where to start. And so if you have any recommendations for that too, I'm all ears. You can also just put these in order of how mad you got when you heard that I hadn't read these authors yet. We're going to start this list with Robin Hobb. I think often about how I have not read Robin Hobb and how badly I want to. So naturally, this one popped up in my head right away as soon as I sat down to start thinking this through. I know that they write these very detailed, character-driven books, and that they have these really traumatic scenes, and it seems to upset a lot of people. I think a lot of people cry throughout these books, and there's just a lot of emotions, and you get really attached to the characters. And those are all things that I love. It sounds like there's a lot of moral dilemmas and personal struggles for these characters, and all of that is happening alongside this really intricate magic system. And it just sounds like, although it would be a painful experience to read these books, like it's a must do. I know I hear people say that they are kind of a slow burn, which I don't think I really mind. I think some of the books are on the longer side, which again is not really something that I mind. I love character-focused fantasy, and I like books that have a lot of emotional depth. So I have been thinking that this will be kind of my Sanderson replacement, because my understanding is that she has I think 16 books in her series so far, which is a lot, and there's a very clear, I think, reading order to them, which is easy to follow. And I think since they are big books and slower books, that it will take me a long time to get through the catalog. And it sounds like that's expected, and that's, you don't have to rush through the series, and the books are written at a slower pace, and so reading them at a slower pace just feels fitting. So I think over the course of the next couple of years, I want to slip in a bunch of Robin Hobb. It's not going to take much convincing for this author to be the number 1 slot for me. The next author that came to mind is Joe Abercrombie. I think people refer to him as Lord Grimdark. I don't know that I've read a ton of Grimdark books, but they sound right up my alley. I think it essentially just means that he's known for writing really dark, gritty stories, probably pretty action-packed from my understanding, but I think he also slips in a lot of kind of dark humor and wit to the stories, which is, again, something that I like a lot. It sounds like you start at the first Law trilogy and then work your way through that, and then you go to Age of Madness from there. His stories sound a little brutal. They sound like they have a lot of morally kind of ambiguous or morally gray characters in them. I do tend to like it when there isn't necessarily a clear divide between good and evil, and it sounds like he plays with the idea of who is really good and who is really bad. And it makes you really think about that and kind of decide for yourself what is right and what is wrong. And get into the head of these characters where you're not really sure if you agree with their choices, but you're kind of rooting for them. That's what it sounds like to me, which sounds really good. So Joe Abercrombie, another one that I'm super excited for. Then there's John Gwynne, the author of Bloodsworn Saga and The Faithful and the Fallen, I believe. I know the covers of The Faithful and the Fallen, he's got like Malice and Valor and Ruin and Wrath, I think, are the four. And they have really cool covers where it's just like a weapon. Part of a weapon is on the cover. And that's really the extent of what I know about John Gwynne. That and that he tends to write, it sounds like, very good action scenes, which for me is always kind of the part that I struggle with in fast-paced fantasy or really any kind of book. It's the battle scenes. I kind of just, my eyes gloss over and I just skim through them. And I think it's because I spend so much time when I read them trying to picture it all. I'm very visual, so when I read, I'm kind of picturing scenes in my head as I go. I think that's why I read kind of slowly when I'm physically reading something. And when I get to battle scenes or anything like that, I really lock up and I take forever to get through them, or I essentially skip them. Skimming through for any plot points that might be snuck in them and otherwise kind of ignoring it. But again, what I've heard about John Gwynne is that he does them really well. And I don't know what that means really, but I'm looking forward to finding out what that means. The Bloodsworn Saga in particular has these insane covers, and I've heard nothing but good things about them. And all of his books kind of look like they have like Nordic influence, which I don't know if that's true, but I think that sounds really fun. And while I am very excited to read his stuff because of the battle scenes and how maybe he does them in a way that I'm not used to, and maybe he does them in a way that will make me enjoy those kinds of scenes more, that is also something that gives me pause about this author, because I don't want to read 400 pages of a battle scene, if that makes sense, even if it's really well done. But again, maybe he'll change my mind on that. So I'm hoping that he still delivers these rich characters and an interesting world, and that he's able to make me still care about his characters and the story within these books. If he can do all that and put in some really engaging battle sequences, I'm sold. This next one is an author that I've almost picked up their stuff several times, and I feel like, and this is a dumb thing to say, I feel like I only haven't picked this up because I don't care for the cover of their books. And I know, again, that's so stupid, but they just do nothing for me. And it doesn't even matter what edition you look at. None of them look good to me. I don't know what it is. But again, that shouldn't matter at all. Fonda Lee has gotten so much praise for her Greenbone Saga, and for me to be ignoring it because I think the covers look lame is so dumb. These sound like they're an urban fantasy, which I do tend to like urban fantasy. I've heard several times people refer to these as The Godfather with magic. I've never seen The Godfather, I'm sorry. But sure, I could see enjoying that. I assume that means that there's a lot of focus on family and loyalty mixed with organized crime. And I know that it's based on this Asian-inspired world, or at least focused on an Asian-inspired culture within some world. And on top of all that, the magic system sounds really neat. I know almost nothing about it other than that there's jade, like stones that people can draw magic from, and I don't know if that means that anybody can be magical or if only specific kinds of people can draw in that magic, but if it's anybody can draw it in, I think that would be really cool. So I'm hoping it's like that, because I feel like there's a lot of stories that I read that you have to be a specific kind of person to be good at this kind of magic. But my very minimal understanding of the Greenbone Saga is that this jade is almost like a drug that people can use somehow and then draw the powers in, and then they want more of it, they need more of it, they get more of it. Again, I haven't read it, I haven't even read the synopsises. That's just my understanding from what I've heard. It all sounds very interesting. I haven't read a ton of Asian-inspired anything, and most of the combat that I read is chainmail swords and heavy weapons and things like that, and this sounds like it would be more martial arts based combat, which could be really cool too. So sounds really fun, and definitely sounds like something that I want to have read at some point. The next one I thought of is is an interesting one because I don't know that I actually think that I would like their books, but I feel like I need to try it, if that makes sense. I'm talking about Ursula K. Le Guin, who's kind of like an iconic author, but I don't really know anything about the books that they write. There's the Earthsea cycle, I think, is the biggest series that comes to mind. And all I know about that is the cover of the first book. I think there's dragons in it, and dragons are neat. I feel like Ursula K. Le Guin is often mentioned as one of everybody's favorite authors, and I just have no idea why or why that is and what their stories are about. I also kind of thought that they wrote books for like a younger audience, but I don't think that that's actually the case. I have no idea, honestly. I don't know. I kind of just assume that there are these deep philosophical, speculative fiction works, and I don't know if that's really my speed, but it does sound like they're an essential author to have read. So I'd like to give them a try. I don't think that they feel incredibly high up on my list, but I do feel like people will convince me otherwise. And while I was thinking about how I didn't know if I would actually like Ursula K. Le Guin, but how I wanted to read them, I naturally went straight to Daddy Fantasy himself, J.R.R. Tolkien. I know it's The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, the most iconic fantasy author out there, and I haven't picked up any of their stuff. I don't own any of it. I've never read a single word they've written, but I have, of course, seen the movies, which I love. I know the story of The Lord of the Rings, and I know the story of The Hobbit, but from what I've heard, there's a decent amount of characters in there that you just don't care about, and there's a decent amount of scenes that are just walking kind of forever and talking, and that the writing is a little complex and maybe thinky, but maybe just a little much. Poetic is, I think, the word that I'm looking for. Maybe not a little much, but poetic. A poetic prose. I don't know if that's my thing. And I'm half convinced that people will agree with me in the comments about how Tolkien can kind of slide to the bottom of this list. Not because they're necessarily bad, but because maybe they're just a little dated, and maybe the adaptations are just so strong that there's possibly not a real reason to go and read these. I don't really know, but we'll see. I do think I should try it. I should give it a shot, and it's on this list for a reason, because I am interested in trying it. I just don't know when. It's about prioritization here. And then again, 3 in a row, I went straight from Tolkien to Robert Jordan, who I feel like has written one of the biggest, most iconic fantasy series of all time since Lord of the Rings. And again, I've never read a single word that he's written. But this is a weird one. I feel like the biggest fans of this series hate it. Like everybody that talks about The Wheel of Time and how it's their favorite series of all time, it's always with an asterisk. And that asterisk is the first 3 books are great, and then you have to skip the rest until you get to the last one, and that's good. That's exaggerated because I don't know exactly, when it stops being good and then when it picks up again. I have no idea, but there is the slog that you hear about, and I just can't imagine myself sitting down and making it through this slog that you hear about, which is apparently, I think, like 5 books in a row or something that are just boring, or that nothing happens, or whatever. It's you have to read them to get to the next book, but they're painful. That doesn't sound fun to me. But I am now watching Sam Harrison go through these books, and I believe he's at the slog, and he's talking about them as if they're fantastic, and he's loving the slog so far. And so I'm confused, and I typically find that I have very similar tastes to Sam Harrison, so it's almost on his recommendation alone that this made it to the list, because initially I was like, well, I'm just going to take that off because I don't know that I actually care to read Wheel of Time, but he is having a really good time, so we'll see. Maybe I'll pick it up. Then there's Stephen King. Stephen King has a ton of books, and he writes a lot of horror. I don't think they're all horror, though, but he's another one where the biggest Stephen King fans will tell you, like, oh man, like Stephen King is fantastic, but the ending on every single one of his books is terrible. And I'm like, okay, cool. I don't know that I need a good ending, but going into a book knowing that the ending is going to disappoint me, or that, starting a book like It, which is, I think, 1 million pages or something like that, and knowing that at the end there's a scene. I don't know what happens in the scene, but everybody talks about this scene that I'm gonna hate, and it's gonna make me hate the book. And that's after having read, I think, over 1,000 pages until you make it to that scene, and then you realize that you hate it, or something like that. It sounds like it's something gratuitous and violent and gross, and I really, I don't know what the scene is about, but I don't want to read it to get to the end of it and be like, oh wow, I am not going to finish this book because that was so gross. But it is a classic, and I feel like I would generally like it, maybe aside from that scene. So I don't know, I'm conflicted. It's also, I just don't know where to start with him. I think I've heard people say Pet Sematary is a good place to start, which I was thinking maybe I would pick up, next month. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where to start with him. I know he has some really short books too. I think The Stand is a novella. Shawshank Redemption too, I think, is really short. And these went on to have these insane adaptations that are so well known and so well regarded. So I don't know. I feel like I can't decide if I would like him or not, and that I should just pick up a book and try it. But I'm weirdly intimidated by that for some reason. I think because his catalog is so large and I can't decide where to start. So if you've read Stephen King, let me know where to start. Another huge icon in the fantasy world is Terry Pratchett. And I actually own 3 Terry Pratchett books. I have Guards, Mort, and Small Gods, I think it's called. And each of those sounds like a series that I would love, or a book that I would love at least. But again, he has, I think, 40 novels or over 40 novels in his Discworld world. It's a series, but it's kind of a series of series, and the series within the big series seem to be interconnected, but you don't have to read them all, and you can read them in whatever order you want. Some people go publication. Some people say just read a series at a time, starting with Guards, or Mort. I feel like those are the 2 entry points that I heard of when I was initially looking into this. I know a little bit about the world that these books take place in, the Discworld, and it sounds ridiculous and very interesting and intricate and funny. I seem to like funny books, and I like witty jokes, and it sounds like he uses a lot of clever wordplay. I don't know that I'm super into social commentaries or that I'm smart enough, I guess, to get the jokes that he'll make. And so I think I'm a little nervous to get into it because I don't know that I'll get it all, or that all the jokes will land. But it's worth a shot. And again, he's such a name in the fantasy space, and it's a name that I definitely want to know more about. So definitely thinking I will pick up one of the books that I already own on my shelf sometime in the next year, maybe 2025, but just not sure who to fit in before or after Pratchett. And finally, the last one on my list that I came up with is Scott Lynch, who wrote the Gentleman Bastard series, which I believe starts with The Lies of Locke Lamora. I think there's 3 books out with a 4th announced, or at least teased. This again sounds to me like it's another series with dark humor in it, like sharp, witty humor with really engaging characters. I know the basic premise of The Lies of Locke Lamora, and that it focuses kind of on friendship and loyalty and betrayal. I believe this is another series with morally ambiguous characters, and it feels almost like it's the found family fantasy series. I think it's also a lot of like heists, or maybe just one big heist. I'm not really sure. But Mistborn, or The Final Empire, is also kind of the story of a heist, and I love that. So yeah, it just sounds right up my alley. I think that happened to just be 10 authors, but I wasn't trying to go for like a top 10, whatever, but that just organically turned into 10 authors. So I'm really curious to see what people say here. I think I'm pretty locked in with Robin Hobb being my number 1, but I don't know. Let me know if you have any opinions on that. Let me know if you have read some or all of these authors and you think that, I was dead wrong about some, and, maybe I should absolutely be reading Tolkien first. I don't know. And that's it for today's video. I want to take a quick second to say thank you for coming back and hanging out with me again. My next video, I think, is going to be kind of a wrap up of this month, the books that I've read, but also just kind of how the channel's going and how the videos have been doing, and maybe a little planning for the future of it. But spoiler alert, I've been having a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed talking to people in the comments and getting things recommended to me, and the engagement has been great. So thank you for coming back and hanging out again. I will see you next week. Bye.